Hey kids, and we welcome you into yet another edition of the Lion Country Kia Goon and Ironhead Show. The dear Goon is without voice, and thus, once again,
still doesn't have a
we
voice.
are without Goon.
Can you imagine him fitting in here?
It would be a challenge, no doubt about it. This is Chris Buganati, of course, filling in for the dear Goon as he has recently, and former Nittany Lion standout Rogers Alexander joining us. We'll get into lots of news from the weekend, obviously, and take a look at the week ahead a bit later in the show. But I have to tell you, it's one of those things where I don't know why it hit me as hard as it did, and we'll talk about your relationship, Rogers, with him. I mean, I followed Steve Smith closely as a fan. I was a junior in high school when the Nittany Lions won that '86 championship, and it was at a football camp the one summer. And it was so funny. And kids, for those of you that are more recent to following football, there used to be this position called fullback. It was a really cool position. And Tim Manoa and Steve Smith, I just have to tell you, they captivated the imagination like few tandems ever have in my lifetime. And again, I grew up diehard Penn State fan from the time I was an infant, but remember really kind of vividly from '75 on Penn State games, and that combination and the relationship there, and then obviously that '86 team is always going to be in Penn State fans' hearts forever. But I guess we want to just start with thanking you for coming down, Rogers. First of all, we sincerely appreciate that, and again, Steve Smith battled Lou Gehrig's disease for longer than anybody I've ever known. I've had a few friends and several friends' parents who suffered from the disease, and it is just a god awful disease. I just hope someday soon we were able to kind of figure out either a cure or a prevention for it, because it's a cruel disease. There's just no way around it. But Steve Smith lived a couple of decades, I think, with it, right?
20 plus years.
Almost 21. That is truly amazing, because again, most of the people I've known that have suffered, it's been a 2 to 3 year process. But let's start with just your. When you got the news and how it kind of hit you as a teammate and obviously very dear friend of Steve's.
Well, I mean, as everyone knows, that in the last couple of weeks, things surfaced on Facebook and other places where Steve had, contracted pneumonia and then gone in the hospital, then been released from the hospital. And then had to go back. And when he went back, sepsis set in. So he was such a battler that, we're like, okay, well, he's going to go back in, but he'll, get through it. And there were days when it looked like he was stabilizing and he was going to get better. And then, the doctors, let his wife know and family know that they should probably come and say goodbye as far as like in the next few days. And of course, his aunt and folks were flying down on Saturday morning and were en route. And he passed on Saturday morning at 10:45 in the morning.
Yeah, just shortly before the Penn State Rutgers game kicked off, and obviously, I think most Penn State fans got news of it during the game. Rogers, talk a little bit, if you would, about your relationship with Steve and kind of how the friendship grew over the course of your career, and then even after your playing days.
Well, actually. There's a few people that know this. I'm sure all our classmates do. But Steve and I were transfer students into DeMatha in 10th grade. DeMatha being a private Catholic high school. You start in 9th grade, which was different in the state of Maryland as far as when high school starts. So I've known Steve since we went out for the varsity football team in the summer of 1979. So it's been a while.
that high school team was probably not too bad.
Not too bad. Not too bad. There's a few guys that, between Tony Page, Mike Johnson, and some other guys off of that team that had 10-plus year careers off of one of the 3 high school teams that we played on.
Right, just talk a little bit about the Penn State experience and Steve obviously became an integral part of that 86 team, was a captain on that squad, but that 85 team was pretty special that you were on it, and probably in many different ways set the stage for the fantastic season that 86 became.
Yeah. I won't share the conversation I had with the rest of my classmates because there were only 4 of us that were not still 5th-year redshirt seniors as they went into that season for the second of 3 attempts at a national title. So Steve and I's relationship, though, when and I want to finish answering your question, your first one. People don't know this, but I'm sure some of the older Penn Staters do, that Joe had a rule that he would not recruit 2 players from the same class from the same high school. Because he was there's that theory that if you recruit 2, you're either recruiting them both or they're going to both make a decision, yay or nay, so you could lose one, or not just lose one, but lose both. So
interesting.
And because I was an accident, so the reason why I had any scholarship at Penn State is because John Rosenberg came to look at more film on the number 1 tailback in the country, who was Steve Smith. So Steve Smith was the number 1 tailback, and back then the USA Today put your image in the paper, and there were no stars. So Steve was the equivalent of a 5-star, top 300, the number 1 tailback in the country.
Yeah.
So by accident, John Rosenberg came across me because back then, of course, before the internet existed, your film was on the same reel. So on the same, and he was looking at offense. So he would then fast forward through the defensive part of the film and then look at offense, and then fast forward through the defensive part of the film and then look at offense and then do it again. And that particular game was the last game of the season. It was a championship, last game of the season against former champion in our WCAC league, which was Archbishop Carroll. And I happened to knock 3 quarterbacks out of the game on the same blitz. So it looked as if it was a splicing error in the film. So Coach Rosenberg asked one of the coaches, he says, "You guys realize you have a mistake on this film. Somebody messed up and there's the same blitz 3 times." And my coach says, "No, that's 3 different quarterbacks that he knocked out." I was like, "Who is this? Who is that kid?" So, if it weren't for them coming to cross the T's and dot the I's, as everyone knows happened back in the day, I wouldn't have been recruited by Penn State. I was one of those players that once they had offers go out, and then some guys opted for other places and didn't then go to Penn State, then there were 1 or 2 or 3 scholarships left. So that's the reason why I had an opportunity to go to Penn State is because of Steve Smith.
Huh.
And of course, some people know those last few scholarships were a couple of skinny defensive end, linebacker, baseball players like myself and Shane Conlon, who got those last few scholarships offers that year. Tom Bradley at Shane's Hall of Fame induction to the College Football Hall of Fame went over that story about going to see him after football season play a basketball game. They never saw him play his senior year.
Yeah.
Right.
So that, those kinds of sort of things that people assume that, I was some great player and blah, blah, I was, anything but because of Steve's notoriety and he was the top tailback coming out of the country that Penn State's, assistant coach went back and just double checking everything again, and ran across me. So, I owe my Penn State scholarship career and everything to Steve.
Yeah. Special stuff. Talk a little bit, Rogers, just about the as you guys are going through your Penn State career, and obviously you had tremendous impact on the program right out of the gate. Talk about what that was like for you individually, and then again, just kind of how things progressed as the two of you went through your careers.
Well, I tell you, in the last few weeks, because of my relationship with Steve and his family and things like that, upon reflection of a lot of things, like the one thing that everyone knows is Steve's smile was infectious, but his sense of humor and his timing, and sometimes just the things that he would say and when he would say them were just spot on. And he knew when to tell you it's all right, like I'm going to be okay. And that's over, since 1979. It's funny because I thought the other night, I said, I wonder how many guys are going to be, sharing a story about Steve and I being in Penn State's camp and we're roommates. So, and of course, I live next to the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. So anybody who knows the DC area knows I live next to a highway that was rather noisy. So our first day of camp, we were nervous, so we were up a little late, and then we went to sleep, and then we woke up, and of course everybody, sort of knows or has heard about the famous foghorn that gets rung under people's doors and wakes them up, and then you go down for your first, breakfast with the team and this, that, and the other. Well, Steve and I slept through that horn. Like, we were like, what horn? We woke up with 10 minutes left before practice, before the meeting started. And then, of course, you go out to practice. We ran from East Halls down to the Lash building, which was now the lacrosse's building.
Yeah.
It's our old locker room. And ran in, and they were like, "Where were you guys?" Like, and they thought they made a mistake that we weren't checked off at breakfast, that somebody just missed us, because no way could they could these guys. So our first day, we were almost late for meetings and then not make it out to practice. And it was kept a secret because, of course, Joe would walk through from his office through Lash building back to the coach's locker room, and then he would pass through the training room and ask Hochberg and Jerry Slagle, everything okay? Everybody here? And they would go, yes. And of course, in the background, they're like scrambling. Hey, where are those two kids from DC? Where? I haven't seen them. One of them's got ankles about yay big, and the other one, like, they should have, traded. Steve should have given half his legs and calves to Raj to make up a full person. So where are they? And then, of course, we run in. And we're like, and they tape us up in 2 minutes. I think they didn't even bother taping Steve. They're like, don't worry, you'll be fine. And we make it out to practice. And of course, we were so scared. We were running down the hill going, we're going to get kicked out because at DeMatha, like you didn't miss anything. You weren't late for anything.
Yeah.
And me being a military kid, being late just didn't exist in my world up until that point. Us oversleeping and sleeping through the horn, like just thinking about that and thinking that's how it started. And of course, when we got back to the room later after the 2 practices and training table, things had taken a turn. In one practice in the morning, Ken Kelly had separated his shoulder and was out for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Jeff Hochberg, Mr. Hoch, the trainer's son, had tore his ACL and MCL and was now out for the year. So I went from 5th team to 3rd team in a morning practice and hadn't played it down. In contrast, Steve, who I'm like, oh yeah, he's going to be a tailback, gets moved to fullback.
Yeah.
So, you would think he would, after that practice and after that second practice, would be back home and he'd be like, man, like I'm, this is not for me. They want me at fullback, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. No, that wasn't Steve at all. Steve was, hey, you got your opportunity to play early because of, some breaks. Take advantage of them. He goes, I'm going to be fine. He says, I'll work my way through whatever I need to work through. He was that kind of person where his own personal battles, whether they be fair or unfair at the time or perceived that way, they didn't exist to a Steve Smith.
Yeah.
It was just another obstacle that he would overcome. And of course, over the years, he's now been affectionately known as Superman, and in more ways than one was a Superman. Superman in his demeanor, Superman in his perseverance. Ultimately, the most Superman in his love of his family, in raising of his family, in loving of his wife, and that sort of, when you saw the love between the both of them, I mean, they went to the movies for 10 years where they had a movie night where one of the theaters down in Texas, down outside of Dallas, would let them come and have a movie night where they would roll the bed in
That's awesome.
to the movie theater through the back door, and they would have their movie night. Still.
Yeah.
I would look forward to, for years, he would go through 4 or 5 hours worth of his eye following on the screen so he could email. He would use his eyes because at that point nothing else was working well enough. He couldn't email any, other than using the iris. It would take him 4 or 5 hours to make his Sunday picks for the week, NFL picks with the rest of the guys. He was still competitive. It's like, and I, for the longest time, I held those picks, and 4 years ago, I went to see him, and I gave him the tally on over those years, because he, that was the one sort of, there were things that happened over the years where you realize that eventually the disease was going to take him. And the first part was the fact that he couldn't email me anymore for those picks. That hurt. That next NFL season was sort of like, because I really didn't watch a lot of NFL, like whole games. I would just catch bits and pieces and things like that. So those were sort of, I wouldn't call it a milestone, but it was definitely one of those things where when it hit, it sort of it lets you know, okay, he's Superman, but yes, he is still human, and he is starting to gradually go. But in all those times, even when I went to see him, like he still had that aura, he still had that presence about him that, whatever it was, he was going to persevere. He was going to see his, daughter Jazzy uh, graduate. He was going to see his son graduate, get married, and he was going to see his grandkids. Like you just had that belief that he was going to do it. And I mean, when you get past year 10 with this disease, and you get into year 15, and you start to look at other players that you heard about in year 7 of 8 of Steve had already passed in
Yeah.
year 10 or 11 of Steve, you start to go, okay, Superman is Superman.
Yeah.
And so, but one of the things that a lot of people don't know is the misdiagnosis of Lyme's disease that he was treated for 3 years before it was found about ALS. So, my belief is eventually, his brain is part of his brain is going to be donated to the place in Boston that does the
Right.
is that hopefully through Chia's documentation of his whole journey, that Steve will still have the last laugh back at everyone and will still help everyone, because it will lead to a breakthrough for a cure for ALS that may be an accidental but still purposeful one, which is somehow, some way, that 3 years of treatment for Lyme's disease may have slowed the progression down in some way, shape, or form.
Interesting. Wow.
Because that's the one thing that's completely different than all the other guys that I've known that have had, the ALS connected diseases. They were diagnosed. They weren't treated for several years for something else. And he would go, he would fly to Philly once a month to be treated for the Lyme's disease, because they were like, why is it? What's wrong? What's going on? What's going on? And he initially found, was preempted to go see a specialist because he was running around Rec Hall. He was up here visiting Penn State, and he was going for a run in 2001 around Rec Hall, and his feet started to get heavy. And he was jogging, and his legs felt heavy, and that was his first indicator of something was wrong. And then those next couple of years, he was treated for ALS. I mean, for Lyme's disease instead of ALS. But I happened to run into him because I was here at Penn State at the time, and we end up running into each other. But yeah, those are some of the things that some folks around know, but not everyone knows about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, what do you remember about when he was properly then diagnosed with ALS in terms of your reaction and his to that news?
Like everything, he digested it. He and his wife thought out a plan. She was very instrumental in his nutrition, which I'm sure is going to be one of those factors where everybody's going to talk about what his longevity. They looked at all kinds of options holistically, things like that would change his nutrition. And her care of him was his greatest endeavor, you would think, or the greatest thing that he received was a national championship or a scholarship or playing in a Super Bowl or being the fullback to, 2 Hall of Famers and Marcus Allen. But no, his greatest gift was his wife. She, over these years, has just been unbelievably carried herself with and is still carrying herself with such grace and humility and strength for the both of them. Um, I, it's the toughest thing to go visit someone who cannot physically care for themselves, and to see what goes on for someone else to have to physically care for someone else on a daily basis. Not for, because they didn't have the in-home nurse that did all the no. His wife wanted to do that, so they would have an in-home nurse to give her a break here and there for her to sleep. But other than that, the caring of Steve was done by his wife for 20 plus years.
That's truly amazing. Just and speaks volumes again about both of them, right? That she's wanting to do that for him, and obviously that they have that connection.
Yeah. It you like looking on Facebook and seeing different teammates, send pictures back. There was one of a picture right after the 87 national championship where you have Steve and Tim Manoa hugging and pointing at the camera. These are two guys who were competitive with against each other also, but teammates. Their competitiveness made them both better, and they handled that competition with such grace.
Yeah.
That you saw the impetus of what would happen years later, where you would have three Penn State fullbacks when you had the Milne and the other two guys, sharing
Whitman,
fullback duties, and then going on to both be successful fullbacks afterwards.
Yeah.
And definitely successful fullbacks while playing that position in college, for sure. And I think it's a lot easier for that Penn State team then to know it when they'd already seen the blueprint from Smith and Manoa. And I'm sure before that Joe had tried it with other folks, but I think you really saw it. I mean, people don't realize, Steve averaged over 4 yards a carry at fullback.
Yeah.
Splitting time. And it's over 9 or 10 yards per catch.
And it speaks volumes to his unselfishness. That I mean, there's a reason he was a captain.
Yes.
And it's not often that you have a captain that's at a position where he's sharing the playing time with another individual.
Yeah.
But again, I think it speaks volumes to his unselfishness and his willingness to truly put team first.
Yeah, he was definitely the glue. I mean, there's so many players that will tell you, Steve, I was down in the dumps, it'd be a player X saying, yeah, I was going through this battle and X, Y, and Z. And I remember Steve stopping to talk to me, at the end of practice, or coming over to me after film session was over, or after being chewed out and talking to me about, don't worry about it. Here's what you need to do, this, that, and the other. I mean, even back to high school, you guys are familiar with Denzel Valentine, the guard that was at Michigan State.
Yeah.
Well, his father, Carlton Valentine, was a sophomore at DeMatha when we were seniors. And Steve lived in Southern Maryland, and Carlton lived in Southeast D.C. Now, Carlton's ride got missed after basketball practice. And Steve heard about it, and Steve went by and picked up Carlton and drove him home to Southeast, which is not really on the way to Southern PG County. But that's what kind of guy Steve was. It wasn't ever about him first. It was about his friends and family and everyone else first.
Well, Rogers, they call Penn State linebacker U, which is something you know a little bit about. But, I feel like if there's another position that it just encompasses the mentality of Penn State football, in my mind, is fullback, right? Like, which is why it's heartbreaking to me that it has disappeared from modern offenses. But
with you.
One of the things I love about it's not just toughness, right? There's a certain unselfishness to it because a lot of the guys who were good enough to come here and play football or play fullback, and that's been true for decades. When they were in high school, they were good enough to be star tailbacks, right?
Yes.
From Matt Suey right on up to Zach Zwinek and plenty of guys in between, including the two guys you just mentioned from the '94 team. And so when I look at, I'm a little bit younger than Ironhead. We won't spend too much time on how much younger. But when I think about the way I came to know Steve Smith as a player, seeing him first with the Nittany Lions, and then, of course, I remember his whole career with the Raiders, which is another one of the organizations, the NFL, that really appreciates guys who can go there and make an impression. And you see the impact he made on his teammates in college and in the pros, and then the toughness and focus that guy clearly possessed in his fight against the disease. And now I'm hearing about from the day you guys stepped on campus, he was the nation's #1 running back recruit, gets shifted to fullback on day one, and doesn't bat an eyelash and just takes it all in stride. Like, it seems to me like the fullback at Penn State was maybe the best perfect position for that guy to play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it encompasses you got to be clutch because you're going to get the third and inches. And everybody in the place knows it, especially back then. Everybody in the place knew 4 yards in a cloud of dust, as we call it. Run right, run left. If it's third and long, screen.
Yeah.
And you got to
sure there are a lot of
people
were
too, right?
and screen to who? Screen to the fullback. So but when the whole place knows you're going to get the ball and you still get the ball and you average the amount of yards he did per carry, when the whole stadium knows what you're about to run, it's about. but I think that goes back to you can coach and be an X and an O and be a strategist and this, that, and the other, but sometimes you just have to let the players play.
Yeah.
And let their talent come to fruition. And Steve was one of those guys. You talk about hit hard. In practice, the drills, and we used to call our Tuesdays Bloody Tuesday. And, that was the one time. And, what was really tough was Steve and I never really got to face off against each other.
I was just going to ask you about
because
that.
Our fields were separated. And because I played so early as a freshman, I was never on a foreign team where Steve was, on a first or second team and then, playing me in practice because I was on the opposite field as a second or third teamer. And then he was, the one time that we were on the practice field and against each other was late in the season, the last game of the season, down in Louisiana. He was Herschel Walker. They pulled him from the active side to simulate what Herschel Walker would run like because of Steve's size and his speed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that he was one of the three guys that they sort of filled in there and said, Steve, you got to give us the look like Herschel Walker so that we can, be prepared for how big and how fast he is. Because none of the foreign team, or as they call the scout team guys, tailbacks, were anywhere close to Steve's size or speed.
Yeah.
So that was the only time that we were ever on the practice field together. And of course, I had very little active practice time because at that point, Ken Kelly was healthy again. And then Al Harris was playing great. So I was a third team guy that was really primarily going to be a special teams player during that first national championship that we won. We never really got to go at it, and which was kind of interesting in itself that we were so tied in that way and never really got to go at each other. But everybody I know, he could thump them.
So I actually want to rewind a little bit, and just for folks who are tuning in, this Rogers Alexander, former Penn State linebacker, here helping us remember Steve Smith. And you guys, again, for folks who did not get the top of the show, were not just teammates at Penn State, but high school teammates at DeMatha Catholic. And you were telling us how Steve was one of the top running back recruits in the country, and you got discovered by Penn State from a coach watching Steve's game film. So I'm just curious, can you give us a little insight into the recruitment process for you guys? What was it that drew you to Penn State, and what was the decision-making process like for Steve as a guy who I'm sure was in demand by a lot of the top programs? Although I did see, I was doing a little research coming in here today, I noticed that neither one of you guys got an offer from the Fighting Irish, and there was maybe a little.
Do you really want to know that story?
I do.
Well, I'll preface it with this: the current head coach of Notre Dame Fighting Irish basketball team was one of our assistant basketball coaches at DeMatha. Mike
Oh,
Gray.
wow. Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes. Steve and I both played basketball also. And Steve and I's first championship winning together was our JV basketball championships at DeMatha before we came to Penn State.
And so young, I must have been very young, Mike Bray was an assistant for your varsity?
Yes.
Okay.
He was an assistant for the varsity.
Wow.
And then I think he went to Duke and then now, yeah.
Huh.
But to preface, thank you, Notre Dame, because you misspelled Steve's name, Steve Schmidt, and you misspelled my first name, Rogers, as Roger with a D and without the S, and told us we weren't both good enough to play there.
I mean, Roger, you can almost understand, but really, Smith. I mean,
now you have to understand, my high school was known primarily for basketball, and this is Notre Dame. Adrian Dantley, I think everybody
decent,
old enough knows he was pretty decent for them.
Yeah, he was.
So you sort of would think that they would make sure that they wouldn't send that type of letter to a place that
really is stunning.
Now, I think
I find more that type of detail.
Is, have you heard of another DeMatha player going to Notre Dame after that?
Ooh. How about that? I like that. This is inside stuff.
That's
great
Steve
stuff.
And I recruited our high school, and we made sure that they knew that story. Anyone coming after that. So there was somebody who went to Michigan State years later whose father said, Denzel, this is what happened with your dad's buddy Steve.
Wow.
Boy, that's amazing to me that those types of errors. I mean, like you said,
right.
Isn't that before you send something out to top recruit?
Yeah. Steve and I were both very interested in I was a better baseball player than a football player. Steve was a better football player than basketball player, but we both played basketball. But DeMatha makes you choose after your sophomore year of playing football or playing basketball, but not both, because for 40 some odd years now, every graduating senior on the basketball team from DeMatha gets a full scholarship to college. The impetus for me going to DeMatha was that it gave me an opportunity to possibly get a full scholarship at a bigger school than, say, our local community college, which I would have been able to afford, but not anything more than that. So, like, Steve and I have been tied at the hip in one way, shape, or form, recruiting-wise or teammates-wise. But the recruiting process, the DeMatha is very hands-on when it comes to how you recruited and how you handle that process and what goes through it. And we were not allowed to discuss our trips, where we were picking,
Oh, wow.
when we were going, except we were not.
Huh.
We were not. We didn't have the opportunity to go on the same date to Penn State. And what people don't realize is that it took a lot for Penn State to actually say, okay, we're going to make an exception, and we're going to offer Rogers a scholarship, even though we've offered Steve Smith the scholarship already, long before that, because he was their first guy. I was after other guys chose somewhere else. Did they have a scholarship available to then think about offering me? So we went separate trips. He was at Stanford when I came up to Penn State. And because he went to Stanford on their super weekend, he missed the super weekend with a lot of the guys that I ended up visiting here. So there were guys like Mike Zordich, same weekend that I was here, I think it was, and a few other guys that ended up being part of our class of 34, the Bob Whites, that class. Now, Z and I were fortunate that, of course, we played as freshmen and did redshirt, but that whole class redshirted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 31 of 34 redshirted, which was pretty common those days, especially for Joe, right?
Actually, that was like the first year that all that redshirt stuff was happening.
Oh, is that right?
Twinkle in your mom's eye.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but Steve's recruitment was huge. I mean, like you name it, they were through. And people, and there were a couple people that tried to, that school over in the western part of the state, that tried to recruit us, but they weren't.
He thought about going to Duquesne. I'll be a son of a gun,
No, but like
Robert Morris has a lot going for
Robert Morris is a solid
I tell you about DeMatha being strict. There were some schools that were on the no recruit list before we were even recruited there. Because of missteps within other folks before us.
Wow.
Interesting.
So some places you would think, I'm sure, this school and that school was in DeMatha to recruit. No. Dean of Men? No.
Who?
Steve committed first? Or did you guys, how did that work? And did you guys, were you going to try to go wherever he went?
I was going to go to North Carolina to play baseball because when I visited Carolina in the middle of the week, I went for the visit on a Wednesday. Just so happened to be Carolina, Virginia in a basketball game that night. So they really wanted me because, of course, unknowingly, I wear my high school baseball jacket, which has DeMatha printed over the front of it, and I get walked into, the Dean Dome back then or whatever. And so I'm behind the basket in this DeMatha jacket for Carolina, Virginia. And this is before the internet, so no one people are pointing and wondering what's going on. And then at halftime, I get ushered in to listen to Dean Smith's halftime adjustments during Carolina, Virginia, when it was Sampson, Worthy, Perkins. But for me, it was like watching Morgan Boot. It was like, you know what I mean? It was the same old thing. And of course, when you're in high school, you don't understand the significance of something like that.
Yeah.
And so I picked up the phone ready to call North Carolina, and I put the phone down, and I decided that, because my mother had died my sophomore year in high school, and Penn State was only 3.5 to 4 hours away then. Now it's like 3 hours, a little less than that with the highways.
Yeah.
It's different. And it would have been 5.5 or 6 to go to Chapel Hill from where we lived in D.C. That I was like, my dad's going to try and come to every game, and it's just going to be so much travel. And Penn State's academics, they actually had the major that I was interested in. And North Carolina didn't have that specific major. So I actually hung up the phone. I had dialed them, and I hung up, took a walk, and then called Penn State.
Wow.
Man.
And Steve and I did not talk to each other until we got back at school and in homeroom. Of course, there were no cell phones. Everybody's like, how come you guys didn't text each other? See, remember, this is in the Stone Age.
The phone was attached to the wall and it had a cord on it.
So your method of communication was dialing, that circular object.
It took a little while to dial, too.
And it took a little while. So, I mean, just making a phone call wasn't,
So you both separately committed to Penn State, not knowing.
Not knowing.
Wow.
No kidding.
Not knowing.
Was he seriously considering? Like, was there a close second for Steve? Do you know?
I think it was Stanford.
Pretty good school.
Yeah. I mean, his father being, I think his father was an IBM executive. I mean, academics and attention to that was first and foremost. From what I remember from hearing about, what Steve was sort of thinking, he's like, oh yeah, my mom and dad want me like I think they were a little disappointed that he didn't even visit Duke, because they had a teammate in high school that went on to play football at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
At fullback. So I think that was one of those things where Duke was trying to end run, right? We're going to recruit the fullback and then see if we can get the tailback and get the combo.
Hey, as long as your fullback's right? Here, might as well.
Right? But yeah, those things, I mean, there's so many things like that with Steve. His influence on our lives consistently all the way through. But for me, I mean, it started way before Penn State.
Yeah.
Way before Penn State.
What was that conversation like when you're back at school, though, and does he ask you, hey, did you commit? I ended up going to Penn State.
Well, yeah, but we were in the middle of basketball season. So what we were worried about was at that point, we were then thinking, okay, like, what's going on with the basketball team? Because we were seniors, we weren't playing basketball hoops, but you know what I mean? So, but we were, our teammates during the summer and our teammates in JV, they were actually going through like the Alhambra tournament coming up. They had played in the Seagull Classic. They were in the middle of playing the Seagull Classic. So that's when they went to play Milt Wagner and all those guys. So Steve and I were fans of our old teammates from basketball. And we were following them. So our conversations were about what's going on at school, not necessarily about, why did you pick or why, because we both picked, but we picked for our own reasons. And our parents sort of made sure that that's why we were what we were going to do. And DeMatha was very, hands-on about making sure that, it wasn't influenced one way or the other, that you need to make your own decisions, and we did the old white paper with 3 different, columns and put all the, things that were important, and you put your goals down there and you number them on how you do it, and then you add them up, and then you decide this. Okay, yes, statistically it says yes, I have more yeses for them than no's, but what's my gut say also? Then that's how I made my pick. And we did not share it with each other until other people shared it with us at school in the lunchroom. But it's
that's amazing.
For an all boys Catholic school, it operates a little differently than a co-ed school. You have all kinds of distractions in a co-ed school. So
oh yes, you do.
But our distraction was athletics. Our distraction
sports.
was what's going on with and not just for our school. It was the band. One of the unique things about Steve and I was, like, when we came here, is Steve loved go-go music, and that music is a unique genre associated with Washington, D.C. And we would play that music in the rooms, and guys would pop their head in and go, "What is that? Like, where are you guys from?" And of course, a DC accent is very unique. I've since lost that accent, but so I would get, and he would get, comments when we would meet people on campus, like, where are you guys from? Are you from, like, are you that recruit from Alabama? Where are you from? Are you, because it's such a unique
That's
accent.
that's a huge recruiting hotbed for Penn State now. Did you have a lot of teammates who were from around the area you were from?
Mark Robinson was I think Mark Robinson might have been Steve's host.
Okay.
My host was Chris Sidman.
Yeah.
From outside of Philly. He's been a track coach, I think, and stuff now at Radnor. So he's from Radnor High School. But yeah, those sort of tidbits, you could say, like, they're sprinkled all through. I mean, and still, like, I dropped a note via another person to get to Coach Bray to let him know that, I will eventually come out and watch the team play, and he wants me to. But yeah,
grudgingly step on that campus.
Oh yeah, and we both over the years, when Notre Dame that week, and I had the best game of my career against them. Of course, I got ran down on the way to scoring a touchdown on an interception by an offensive tackle, which Goon never lets me live down.
Really? That seems so unlike him.
I know, especially when I was in his basement when he was 13 years old with size 14 shoes, looking at him going, oh, yeah, he's going to come to the state, because I was with his little brother.
Yeah. Man.
Right.
Do you have? I'm sure you've been sorting through a lot of the memories. Is there a memory or two that stand out for you when you think of? I mean, you've shared some wonderful ones already, but is there, when you think Steve Smith, is there a situation or a memory or two that just stand out above the others that encapsulate either your relationship with him or just the essence of the man?
It was probably the moment after we lost the national championship when I was a captain in '85 to Oklahoma. And he looked at me and he said, don't worry, we're going to get one next year. You might have lost it now, but I'm not going to let you down next year. And I mean, he was always thinking about somebody else's feelings first.
Yeah.
It wasn't about him. He was always thinking of others first. And that stems from how well his parents raised him, and what kind of guidance that we got from DeMatha. That school had a huge influence on the both of us. Being a DeMatha man, and their credence, and of course, you see DeMatha sprinkled all over the place, but people really don't even know how much it's sprinkled. I mean, we had 5 national championships in collegiate football my freshman year who were DeMatha high schools.
Is that right?
Because we had 3 in Division II football that won national championships. Wow. So 2 from DeMatha, and then I think it was Western Kentucky that won the Division II, and we had 3 other teammates that.
Wow. What was that '86 season like for you? How were you in contact? I mean, I know obviously you're focused. I'm assuming you're focused on your career now and the Jets and everything with that. But were you in contact with Steve on a regular basis? Were you following that team, or were you trying to stay completely away?
My buddies talked me into going to the game. I went out to Arizona. I sat in the stands. I didn't stand on the sidelines. And of course, you have to understand, I have the other set of keys to the doghouse that Matt Millen and I had from Joe. So
I didn't know that Matt was willing to share those keys.
I think he had to with me. So So I was in the stands. I was not going to be on the sidelines. But yeah. But I mean, it's unfortunate that it's times like these where you have the time to reflect back on things. But when you think about, okay, if somebody were to ask you, who are you, who influenced your life and the path it went the most, very few people would be able to put a high school classmate in their top 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
Much less your
Yep.
top 5, right? It would be your father, your grandfather, someone close to you, a relative, like your priest, your rabbi. But would it be your high school classmate?
Yeah. Yeah. That speaks volumes.
I mean, not just about just like influence on your college, but he's had an influence because of that on the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I would challenge anyone to try and think. I mean, they're in there.
That's a great, that's a great point and a great way to summarize the impact of a life led with purpose and a life that truly inspired many people, even before the Lou Gehrig's disease hit, and obviously many more since that. And Steve, may you rest in peace. Thank you for the wonderful memories as a kid, and Rogers, we can't thank you enough for coming down and sharing the time here this afternoon with us.
Yeah, thanks. This was awesome, man. Thank you.
Rogers Alexander, former Nittany Lion standout linebacker, and again, kind enough to join us and reminisce about Steve Smith. We'll spend Thursday's show talking a little bit about the Penn State Rutgers game, getting ready for Penn State, Michigan State. Not Thursday. Thursday's Thanksgiving. We'll just next Tuesday. Yeah, we're not going to do. Booch can come down if he wants.
You know what? I'll pass.
You found something else.
I appreciate
that is like the 5th time in the last 2 days. I just keep thinking this is going to be a regular Thursday. And unrelated to this show, but I'm like, oh yeah, I'll see you Thursday. Like, you're not going to see us Thursday. I'm like, well, yeah, we always come. Oh no, I won't see you Thursday. You're right. I don't know why I can't get it in my mind that Thursday's Thanksgiving.
I'll tell you what, though. How about this?
Yeah.
I will give you a saucy prediction.
Yeah.
We had to do our last regular season predictions of the year for TV.
Yep.
So I'm letting the cat out of the bag.
Yep.
I'm not bragging or anything, but I have the best record of any one of the 4.
Certainly not bragging about it.
Yeah, no, not at all.
But the record clearly states.
I only missed one time all season. You can probably guess the game I missed on. I did not have us losing
Ohio
to
State.
The Fighting
You thought
yeah.
Penn State was going to beat Ohio State. Yeah. Oh, in Illinois, really? You didn't see that one coming, huh?
24-20. I got Penn State winning in East Lansing.
Yeah, so here's the thing. So you understand where I'm coming from and what I'm actually, because every time I predict and I feel good about a game, right, it does not go well. So
if you ever need any gambling tips, call him up and run the opposite direction.
Absolutely, go the opposite way every single time. Yes. So I actually do feel good about the game, but because
you're going to reverse jinx them.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm on the record to help the boys out. Not that I really think they need it. I'm going to say Michigan State 20-13, but I have a really, really good feeling that my prediction is going to be wrong.
So I don't do the reverse jinx stuff. Here's my thinking. I don't care how much money they pay the head coach. Michigan State is Michigan State. And like clockwork, they find a time in the season to shut it down. And listen, and after you lose 56-7, perfect time to just pack it in, guys.
This is true. Here's the other thing. This Penn State receiving core has become something special, right? Yeah. You knew going into that Michigan State-Ohio State game, and I did not see what happened coming, but you knew that the matchup that Michigan State was concerned about, right, is that secondary going against that passing game of Ohio State. James Franklin did say, and I'm telling you, I know 28-0 over Rutgers is a yawn for a lot of Penn State fans. Given all of the circumstances, I am telling you, that is about as gutsy of an effort as we've seen from a Penn State team in a long time. And we've seen lots of gutsy efforts. I mean, that's not a knock on any of the previous games or teams here under James Franklin. But I'm telling you, it was ridiculous to have the number of players and the impactful players that they had out of that lineup, and to be able to find a way to manage. I talked with a couple of buddies of mine about this. I truly think, and again, hats off to the players, but I truly think that was as good a coaching job as James Franklin has done since he's been here, and that's Ohio State game, 2016. All of the games included. You cannot. We talk about how do you prepare for the Michigan State situation with the weather delay?
Right.
How do you prepare? You know that you could have injuries. You know that there could be illness. You're not expecting 30 guys to be unavailable, right? When you start the week and you have pretty much everybody, that is an absurd situation that the program faced and was able to persevere and get through. But James Franklin did say prior to coming down with the bug that he got, that Sean Clifford was having his best week of practice this season. If Sean Clifford puts a similar week of practice together with that receiving core, I'm just telling you, Michigan State can make all the adjustments it wants. Penn State is going to have a lot of points and a lot of passing yards on Saturday. And I'm with you. I think Michigan State is kind of where Penn State was coming off the Iowa loss in terms of trying to get its psyche back, and I just don't think it's going to be there. And I think Penn State right now, I talk about momentum probably way too much, but I think there's a good feeling about the program within the program right now. Because of what they were able to persevere against Rutgers. I think they know this would be a great win to get to end regular season, get you to a decent bowl game. And again, I think it can set the stage for bigger and better things. And we'll talk about the James Franklin situation as well next Tuesday.
Yeah,
but
we've got
it's
right now what programs all over the Power Five are craving, which is stability.
Yeah,
and
stability. And again, I think with the recruiting class coming in and the experience now that this team has gone through, and listen, I get it. Fans don't want to go through a 5-loss season followed by a 4-loss season, but it does feel to me like that this is building up to something pretty special, and I think you're going to see that sooner rather than later going into next season. And real quickly, while we're on the subject of gutsy, hats off to my Steelers. I was telling Booch before we went on, in all honesty, that is and I get it. It's the NFL. There's not moral victories and all of that. And I'm almost always on board with that. I am telling you, it's been a long time. Like, I can't remember the last time I felt as good about a loss. And I'm not telling you I felt good at the time that game ended, because, man, it was right there. But what a gutsy effort by the Steelers. And listen, if I try to take an objective look every now and then, even when I'm caught up in the moment. Objectively, that was just a fun game to watch, right? If you didn't have a rooting interest, well, you could tell me you didn't have a rooting interest. Right. I mean, it was an entertaining football game. That fourth quarter was wild.
Yeah.
And for me, it was kind of similar to that Rose Bowl loss for Penn State, where it was just such a thoroughly entertaining game that, yes, I'm disappointed by the loss, wanted the win and all of that, but man, it was just fun to watch the game. And I'll take away more of the memory of watching the game and the effort than I will the result. So long as the Steelers make the playoffs. Now, mind you, if they miss by a half game between the Lions tie last week and this loss, I'll have a different perspective on this, and I'll freely admit that. But at the moment, I'm feeling okay about it.
You know what helps in the pursuit of a playoff spot?
Not tying the Detroit Lions,
being part of the worst division in football.
Let's go Birds. There is
right in it,
there is that.
Right in it.
All right. Well, have a happy Thanksgiving. We won't talk about anything on Thursday, at least not here. Oh, we'll probably talk about stuff, but it'll be more, with family.
Not on the internet.
At the Thanksgiving dinner table. Hopefully, Goon will be back with us next Tuesday as well. Again, our thanks to Rogers Alexander. Folks, have a very happy Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday. Until then, be good and be safe.